Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of English Vocabulary Matters, news for English learners. This is the first article of 2024, and we're kicking off this year by looking at a news article concerning the UK Post Office and a scandal and miscarriage of justice that it has been involved in. As usual, we'll be reading it through paragraph by paragraph and pausing to take a look at some of the more interesting words and phrases. Don't forget to check out some of my other videos if you enjoy this. There are lots of news articles and also some trivia quizzes and some short videos about various phrases. So, without further ado, let's kick off with the first paragraph. Former Cabinet Minister David Davis has urged the government to exonerate hundreds of sub-postmasters and mistresses who were wrongly convicted of theft, fraud and false accounting due to a faulty computer system. Mr. Davis, who is leading a cross-party group of MPs campaigning for justice for the victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal, said that the government should own up to their mistake and issue a formal apology and a pardon to all those affected by the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history. So let's look at the first word we have here highlighted. It is the regular verb to exonerate. When we exonerate somebody, that basically means that we're saying they are innocent. And usually we use it in cases where people have been convicted, but later we find new evidence that proves that they were in fact innocent. And therefore they are released from jail, sometimes compensated. It is different from pardon. Similar, but it is different. And the main difference is that if somebody is pardoned, it basically means they're excused from being punished. But it does not mean that they are necessarily innocent. Perhaps they committed the crime, but for some reason, maybe there are extenuating circumstances, they are not punished in the same way as other people who committed the same crime. The President of the United States has a presidential pardon, and it is within his prerogative or her prerogative to pardon people, to excuse certain convicted criminals from being punished. Now, in this case, the people who were convicted were innocent. They had not actually committed the crime that they were accused of. So in this case, we use the verb exonerate rather than pardon because of that key difference I just highlighted. So moving on to the second word we have, this is theft. Now, theft is a noun. There is a related noun, which is thief, and a thief is a person who steals things, somebody who takes things that do not belong to them. So from that, we can deduce that a theft is the act of stealing. And in this particular case, the people who were in charge of the post offices in towns and villages all across the country, some of them were accused of stealing money from the post office. They were accused and in some cases convicted of theft and also fraud and false accounting. But this was all because of a newly installed computer system that was faulty. So that brings us on to the third word. Faulty is an adjective that's used to describe systems or machines or products that are not working correctly. They're not functioning as they were designed to function. In this case, the new computer system had bugs and errors in it, so it was not functioning in the correct way, and for this reason, it gave out misleading information, and it appeared that the postmasters and mistresses were actually stealing money, even though in fact, it was just a computer error. It was a faulty computer system. If you buy something and it's faulty, well, usually you would take it back and get it replaced, or they would send somebody out to repair it for you. And the noun is fault. Sometimes we use it in the expression, it's not my fault. If you are not responsible for something, then you would say it's not my fault. Or if you are blaming somebody for something, you would say it's his fault or her fault. So it's quite a useful word. Moving on to the last phrase we have here in this paragraph, it is to own up to own up to something. This is a phrasal verb, and basically if you own up to something, you are taking responsibility for that. Usually used when we're talking about mistakes or errors. If you have made a mistake, then you've got really two options. You can either try to hide your responsibility, or you can put your hand up and just tell everybody that it was your fault, right? In the second case, you're owning up to the mistake. That is, of course, the most honest thing you can do. In this article, it's saying that the government failed to own up to their mistake, and that is why they're being blamed for this big problem. We can also use the verb own when we're talking about possession of things. So if you are a home owner, then that means you own a house or a flat. You are the owner, you bought it. Whenever you're talking about possessions, you can use this. And the abstract noun is ownership. Moving on to the next paragraph. The Horizon system, which was rolled out in 1999, was used to manage transactions and accounts in thousands of post office branches across the UK. However, the system was plagued by glitches and errors that caused discrepancies and shortfalls in the accounts. The post office, which is owned by the government, pinned the blame on hundreds of sub-postmasters and mistresses, accusing them of stealing or mismanaging money, and prosecuted them based on the evidence from the Horizon system. Many of them were convicted and sentenced to prison, community service, or fines. Some lost their homes, businesses, and reputations, and some even took their own lives. So the first word we have up here is a phrasal verb, to roll out something or to roll something out. So it is a separable phrasal verb. And basically we use it when we're talking about the introduction or implementation of a new policy or system or product. In this case, we're talking about a new computer system, the Horizon system, which was introduced in 1999. It was rolled out to all of the different post offices in the country. Usually when we're talking about rolling out something, it's a gradual process. It's not instantaneous. So there could be a relatively long time period of transition from one system to another. If we are talking about policy, government policy, usually there is a transition period as well, where people are given time in order to adapt to a new way of doing things. A good example of this could be the COVID vaccination rollout. That involved concentrating first on the most vulnerable groups and gradually expanding it or rolling it out to the whole of the population. There have been many other cases where new policies have been rolled out, new systems. The government has often changed the educational system and gradually rolled those changes out to the whole country. And even environmental policy has changed. We used to use plastic bags in supermarkets, and gradually a tax on plastic bags was rolled out. And also there has also been a tax on sugary drinks that was rolled out recently to try to discourage people from consuming them in excess. So the second word we have in this paragraph is the word branch, in the plural, branches. Now this is a bit of a metaphor, because really a branch is part of a tree, right? A tree has roots under the ground which support it, has the main part of it, which is called the trunk, and it has lots of branches that come off the trunk and end in leaves. However, in this case, we're not talking about a tree, we're talking about post office branches. So a branch in this case is an office, a small office that is related to a big organization. It's part of a big organization, just like the relatively small branch is part of the big tree. All of those branches lead to the trunk, like the little offices of the post office are connected to the headquarters, which could be, for example, in a big city like London. So there were thousands of these post office branches all over the country, all over the UK, in many towns and cities and villages. So the next word we have here is the noun and regular verb plague. If we think of the noun first, that might help us to understand the usage here. Often when we think of plague, we think of the Middle Ages, because in that period there were various episodes of the bubonic plague, which was a serious infectious disease caused by a bacterium, and it was spread by the bites of fleas which lived on rats. And this disease spread from Asia into Europe and killed many millions of people. So it was a very serious disease. So similarly, when we use it as a verb, we are basically talking about persistent, serious problems. We can use it in many contexts. For example, particular areas, cities, or regions can be plagued by problems of unemployment or economic depression. If we think of Afghanistan, the country of Afghanistan, that country has been plagued by wars and civil unrest and social problems and drug addiction for many, many years. It has had very persistent, serious problems. If we think of the United States, that country has been plagued by gun crimes for many, many years now. There have been so many different massacres and mass killings repeatedly. It seems to be an intractable problem that just will not go away. So any case where, in a similar way, where you have a very entrenched problem that is persistent and repeated, we can use this verb. In this case, the computer system in question was plagued by errors in the programming which caused discrepancies in the accounts that led to the prosecution of the people who ran the post office branches and their wrongful conviction. So the fourth phrase we have here is to pin the blame on somebody. Basically, this is very similar to the usage of the verb blame. When you blame somebody for something, it basically means you are saying they are responsible for a problem or a mistake. It is their fault. They caused it. And in a similar way, we can use it in this phrase. Obviously, it's used as a noun here with the verb to pin, but the meaning is the same. You're apportioning blame and responsibility. When we use the verb pin, we are basically attaching something with a small, sharp piece of metal. For example, you can pin a note to a notice board. And in a similar way here, it's almost as if you're trying to attach the blame onto somebody. So the implication is that perhaps you're doing something, you're blaming somebody who is perhaps not responsible, maybe they're innocent, using them as what we call a scapegoat. So that is really, I guess, the difference between the normal verb and this expression. If somebody's to blame, it's their fault. But if you're trying to pin the blame on somebody, perhaps you're trying to avoid responsibility yourself and to push the responsibility onto another innocent person. And that is, in fact, what happened here. The post office pinned the blame on hundreds of sub-postmasters and mistresses, falsely accusing them of stealing or mismanaging the accounts, when in fact they were innocent. And the post office knew that. So moving on to the last word we have here, this is the noun fine. Can also be used as a regular verb to fine somebody. And it's talking here about the consequences that the postmasters and mistresses suffered after they were convicted. Many of them were sent to prison as punishment, or they received community service where they had to do some kind of work as a kind of punishment. And some of them were also fined. So that means a financial punishment was imposed. They had to pay usually quite a large amount of money to compensate for the mistakes in the computer system. And of course, a lot of them consequently lost their homes and their businesses because of that. They had to pay all of this money to return the money, and they couldn't afford it, so they had to perhaps sell their home or their business to pay for that. People often receive fines from the police when they break the law. For example, if you park illegally and the police see you, they will write a fine and put it on your car or give it to you, and you will have to pay that. You can also get a fine for smoking on the bus or for traveling on a train or other public transport without a ticket, and many other things. Of course, we do also use the same word in a totally different way as an adjective or adverb to say that something is good or acceptable, or perhaps that you are feeling well and healthy. So, for example, if I ask you, how are you? You might respond, I'm fine, thanks, meaning that you feel well, healthy. If we talk about the weather and I ask you, what's the weather like today? You could say, oh, it's fine. In other words, it's sunny, it's not raining, it's not too windy. We can also use this word to say that something is of a high quality. If we talk of fine wines, we mean very expensive and high quality wines. So, moving on to the final paragraph. In 2019, after a long legal battle, the Post Office agreed to pay £58 million in damages to 555 claimants who sued the organisation. In 2020 and 2021, the Court of Appeal and the Crown Court overturned the convictions of 59 sub-postmasters and mistresses, and more cases are expected to follow. However, Mr. Davis said that the compensation and the appeals process were not enough to make up for the harm done to the victims and their families. The government should not hide behind the post office or Fujitsu. They should admit that they failed to regulate the post office properly and that they turned a blind eye to the warnings and complaints of the sub-postmasters and mistresses for years. The public is outraged by the injustice and the cover-up of the Post Office Horizon scandal, he said. So the first word here highlighted is the verb to sue. Now, used in a legal context, to sue somebody essentially means that you take a legal action against them. So perhaps somebody has said something online that is objectively false about me, and I decide that I'm going to take that person to court. So I will hire a lawyer, and the lawyer will initiate a legal process in which they will try to prove that the information posted about me was objectively false. And if the judge agrees with that, they will order the person accused to pay damages to me. They will have to give me some money to compensate me for the damage to my reputation. Now, in this case, the people who were falsely accused of stealing from the post office sued the post office, and they won, and they got £58 million in damages, in compensation. So let's move on to the next word. We have the verb to overturn. Now, this is related to turn over, the phrasal verb. When you turn something over, you're basically flipping it. You are changing it from one side to the other. Think about making a pancake or a crepe or an omelette. When you make an omelette, you pour the egg mixture into the pan and cook it on one side. In order to cook the other side, you have to turn it over. Usually this involves putting a plate on it and flipping it quickly. Now, in this case, overturn is very similar because it involves moving from one position to another. But instead of somebody doing it on purpose, usually it happens as the result of some other circumstances. So, for example, if I'm driving a truck and it's very windy, the wind may blow so hard that my truck is overturned. It falls onto its side. In this case, it's used in the legal context that the convictions of those people were overturned in a similar way to the truck being overturned by the wind. The judgment was overturned. In other words, those people who were considered guilty were now considered innocent. It's almost as if their condition has flipped, like that truck or like that omelette. So it is often used, this verb, to talk about legal cases where there has been a miscarriage of justice, when someone has been falsely accused and convicted, and then later new evidence comes to light, and that leads to the judgment being changed, being flipped, and that conviction is overturned, and those people are released from prison or they are paid compensation. Moving on to the next phrasal verb here, this is to make up for. To make up for. Now, this is a phrasal verb that basically is related to compensation. So let's imagine that I've had an argument with somebody, and during that argument, I insult them. I say bad things about them. Later, perhaps I regret that. And I want to apologize. And I also want to make up for the harm that I did. So perhaps I buy a present for my friend. And that present is in some way compensation for the harm that I did. It makes up for the insults that I used. In this way, what it's saying here is that Mr. Davis does not believe that the things that have happened, the compensation and the legal process, is enough to compensate those victims for all of the terrible suffering that they've had to endure during all those years. Don't forget that this has been going on for nearly 20 years in total. He is saying that there needs to be better compensation, more money available more quickly in order to compensate them adequately. The next phrase we have here is to turn a blind eye to something. This is an idiom. And this idiomatic phrase is a little similar to another one we have dealt with in another video, which is to bury your head in the sand. In both cases, we're talking about ignoring something. If you are blind, that means you cannot see. And obviously, if you turn your blind eyes to something, if you focus on something with your blind eye, you're obviously not going to see it. You're not going to be aware of it. So that is the real meaning here. You are deliberately avoiding facing up to some problem. Perhaps the problem is too big for you to handle, or maybe it would be too expensive to deal with it. So instead of addressing it, you decide to bury your head in the sand or to turn a blind eye to it. In this case, the post office chose to ignore all of the warnings that they received and all of the complaints that they received. They did not take any action based on those complaints and warnings. And that obviously ultimately led to the terrible suffering of those postmasters and mistresses. So moving on to the penultimate word here, this is outrage. Now, outrage is a noun. It can be used as an adjective here. And when we talk about public outrage, it basically means a lot of people are getting angry. And in this case, this process has been going on for many years, but recently there was a TV show which highlighted this issue. And I think this has really focused the public's attention on this injustice. And it has meant that a lot of people are becoming aware of it, and they are showing their anger, their outrage publicly, demanding that something is done to help these people who have suffered so much. That is why that there's a lot of focus on this in the UK at the moment. Finally, we come to the word cover up. Now, this is a noun, but can also be used as a phrasal verb to cover something up, a separable phrasal verb. This is often seen in the context of conspiracies. Some people believe in conspiracy theories. It's like an alternative explanation for some event. Classic examples could be the assassination of John Frederick Kennedy, the President of the United States, in Dallas, Texas. The official theory is that there was an assassination by a lone gunman firing a rifle shot from a book depository. And this is not believed by some people. Some people believe there was a cover-up, that he was in fact the scapegoat. He was, maybe to use the phrase from before, the government pinned the blame on him, when in fact the real assassination was caused by a different person or different organization. Some people blame the CIA, others blame the Cuban communists, or even the mafia. There's so many different theories. But a cover-up is always when an organization, could be a government or a company, tries to hide evidence of wrongdoing. So in this case, the post office tried, or perhaps the government tried, to hide the evidence of miscarriage of justice and the evidence of the errors in the computer system. Think of it almost like you are literally covering a secret with a sheet or with a blanket. So you're covering it up so that other people cannot see it. So that's it. We've reached the end of today's article. I hope you've enjoyed it and perhaps learned a few new words. Don't forget to check out my other videos when you have a chance, and of course like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Until next time, I'll say goodbye.